And so for those that may be listening, and either because they tried recovery and it didn't work and their marriage ended and they feel shame about that, or they grew up in a theological tradition where they were taught that divorce was the worst thing and almost to the point of outside of God's grace. Whatever it is that triggers a person's shame around divorce, if it does, just to speak the truth, that there isn't anything that is beyond God's grace, that relationships are complex, and we don't have to be defined by a failed relationship. Just because my relationship fails doesn't suddenly make me a failure. And if I can learn from that and grow from that, then I can bring whatever healing I've experienced into the next relationship, whether, like you said, it's family or friends, or if it does lead to marriage, and it can become what I wanted and needed from the beginning. But it is going to take my effort, my work, and my commitment to recovery.
Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. I'm Randy Everett, your co-host. And again, today we are here with our usual host, Dr. Greg Miller. Greg, great to see you.
It's good to be here.
And our favorite guest of all time, the director and co-founder of Faithful and True, Debbie Laaser. Deb, it's good to see you.
Thank you.
She wore something eye-popping today, so we can pick you out of a crowd.
Yes, yeah. Do you say favorite to all your guests?
No,
I always wondered that.
You can listen.
Go back and listen to all of them, and you won't hear me reference anybody else.
Is
That's
that
right.
Yeah, that's called
thank-
schmoozing. So Deb's with us today, and she's going to help us talk about a very interesting subject today. And Greg, you give a great explanation about this subject. What would you say about it?
Well, I think just what we want to do today is to acknowledge that what's true for some couples, even with efforts towards recovery, not all couples make it. And there are many of the people who have come through Faithful and True, even listening to our podcast, that did the work of recovery, and for a variety of different reasons, their marriages didn't make it. And so now they're navigating their recovery as a divorced person. And this can be men who are really working to recover from the addiction and remain sober. And I would say it's also women who also have gone through a divorce and are simply wanting to heal from the past and just to become the best version of them that they can be. So we just want to talk a little bit about maybe some of the factors that would contribute to a couple not making it, and then what does it look like for a divorced person, a single person, to continue their recovery journey.
Well, I think you're right, Greg. We don't have specific statistics on this, although I'm asked often about what are our statistics about who is able to stay married. I think what's true for us is when we see them engage in what we have come to know as a good recovery program for both of them, that we have very good results for people who are able to stay together, not just stay together, but also grow together. And by that meaning that life is actually even better in many, many ways than it was prior to D-Day, crash and burn, explosion, whatever we call that.
Right. And one of the things that can be true, if you've listened to our podcast, you've heard me talk about this before, but I really see that there are two types of couples that come through. One is the couple that would say, you know what, we had a good relationship, we enjoyed life together, things weren't perfect, but there wasn't this great distance or disconnection or even injury in our relationship. And then we found out about the addiction. And so we began to address the addiction, but we kind of come from a place of a history of connection. There's another type of couple, and their reality is, apart from the addiction, there was a lot of chaos and pain, that there were other dynamics in the relationship. It could have been how the relationship started. It could have been just the dynamic between the two of them, some unhealthy patterns and dances, and then they find out about the addiction. And what we know is for that couple that has the history of chaos in the relationship, a history of difficulty and challenges, and then on top of that is the addiction, that is a much more complicated place to come back from. And that is because you can deal with the addiction, and then you also have to deal with that history of injury and pain that may be in the relationship.
And I think it could be especially difficult if everything is blamed on the addiction. And what I believe is, many people come from histories, from family life or other traumatic experiences in their life that they're bringing in a lot of pain, even before addiction was really part of their life in the relationship. So it becomes really important to understand who we are, even as we came into a relationship, so that we don't get stuck with blaming our spouse about everything that went bad in our relationship.
Right. So I just want to acknowledge what might be some of the factors that would cause a couple that are seeking to recover but are struggling to be successful. And one of them would be the husband who's struggling with the addiction, who's not fully invested in transformation. It could be that they are struggling with sobriety, and so there's a history of kind of slipping and sliding, and there can't be a confidence in the sobriety, and maybe for 6 months, maybe for a year, maybe for 2 months, but at some point it comes back. I've heard you say that, the more that there's the slipping and the sliding, eventually the more difficult it is for a spouse to really come back from that. But I also think there is a way that some men engage recovery, and they're able to do it where they are sober from sexual acting out. However, there could be other addictions and coping strategies that are not being addressed. And there is just this sense of unhealth in them. The AA would call this the dry drunk.
Right.
They're not drinking, but they've really not addressed the issues. And so they're not showing up differently in the relationship. And my guess is there would be women that, would stay engaged for a while, hoping things would change, wanting their husband to show up differently. And then in time, it's just too much, that they don't feel like staying is what would be best for them. And I just want to validate that there are times when a couple getting a divorce is what is needed in order for there to be emotional health and spiritual health for either both of them or one of them. And we know that that's a very difficult decision, and sometimes that may be the needed decision.
Yeah, and I think we've said too that I think God is most interested in us as individuals to work on our sanctification. And for some, it actually takes being out of the relationship for that to happen, just as you were saying. And, there are many factors about that, but sometimes the relationship becomes the focus and everything is done for the relationship, and there's still that lack of focus on what it means for self-care and learning about your own experiences and understanding why you believe what you do and why you do what you do and how your own experiences have contributed to how you respond. There's so many things to learn about each of us individually. And sometimes we just don't take the time to try to focus on that until we truly are alone. And so it can become sometimes for many people a healthy thing to be out of a relationship for a time. It could be in separation, which we also believe in here, to take that time to put the relationship on hold while we really focus on just our individual growth.
Right. One of the things that can happen, I think, is a couple engages recovery and they bring different levels of energy to it. And so what ends up happening is one person in the coupleship begins to thrive, is being transformed, is really doing the work and seeing things differently. And then the partner is not necessarily engaged at that level. And this distance is is being created between them as one is moving forward and thriving, whereas the other one may be stuck in the past. You mentioned this idea that for some women, it's hard for them to move past the blaming of the addiction and maybe their husband for everything that's not worked in the relationship. And what we know is if there's just this pattern of blaming, it doesn't lead to intimacy and connection. And ultimately, it won't be a safe place in the relationship. So there are times when the husband is willing to engage and does a great job, is experiencing freedom, and not just the sobriety, but also this transformation piece for a variety of different reasons the wife isn't able to do that. And because of that, there is a moving away that may eventually end up with the relationship ending.
Mm-hmm. And it can be true, as you say, Greg, that it's not just a wife who asks for a divorce because of the pain she's experienced from betrayal. It may also be him when his desire is or has already been to become a sober person and to work on root causes so that behavioral changes are not the only thing he works on, but he truly is becoming a different person and longs for someone to be able to join him at that emotional level in relationship. And if she isn't willing to work on some of those things, because none of us are perfect at that. And so I've always said when, a spouse has been engaged in an addiction and is away from the relationship, away meaning at times of using, he's not present in the relationship, she must be doing something herself to manage the fact that there is that distance. And that can become some of our first work that's when I noticed how busyness for me was one way I always managed alone time. And some of that can be good, but not all the time. And it can definitely build into my lack of being emotionally present. So learning those things is so important for both. And it could be that he desires more of that and there's just not enough work on her part to really make some of those relational changes, not changes for the sake of taking, what's the word I'm looking for? Taking ownership of the addiction or any cause for it, but taking ownership for the fact that we all can work on changing things to make our relationships better.
I've heard, and I think it's valid, that there are times for a wife where there's just been too much. There's been too much acting out. There's been too much deception. There's been too many secrets. And what can be true is it's not just what has happened in the relationship, but we hear of the stories where, husbands had significant secrets that they brought into the marriage that they never identified. And the beauty of recovery is they started getting honest, they started getting open and sharing. And it was just the reality that it was too much. And if a wife is in that place, I think it's important to hear that sometimes, given who they are, given their experiences, given their stories, it is too much.
Yeah.
And so we just have to acknowledge that. We talk often about this statistic that when a full disclosure is done well and it's done with support, 95% of those couples make it. But we can never guarantee that you won't be that 5%. And what we know is some of that 5% are those where it was just so much information, so much hiding, so much deception that a spouse simply wasn't able to come back from that.
Yeah.
And that can be another reason why the couple's engaged recovery, but they're just not able to find their way forward.
And I think that's understandable. There are times when disasters and traumatic events are just so big, we just can't come back from them. And we respect the fact that a person knows when they're in that place. And I see it clearly in a wife. It's not that she doesn't believe that she would like to be able to come back or that she believes in marriage or she doesn't want this for the family. And yet there's everything inside of her that just says, I can't. I just can't. And so I hope people hear from us that it's not, for us, it doesn't matter. We're here to help you as individuals. Ideally, it would be to help with a marriage as well. And it's not always that. And there's always learning and growing for individuals, whether you're in or not in the relationship.
Absolutely.
And that's definitely what I see.
What's interesting is we work with men who their marriages did not make it. They've ended up in divorce. And one of the challenges is they begin to discover how much of their motivation for their recovery was to save the marriage. And now the marriage is no longer being saved. And for many of those men, they're kind of surprised at how little motivation they have for their recovery just for themselves. And what we know is for couples that are married, for men who are married, some level of your energy for recovery does come for wanting to save your marriage. And there's really nothing wrong with that. And that cannot be the primary motivator. And in these cases, the husband, if there's been a divorce, has to find that motivation that I'm going to do this for myself.
Right.
This is what I want. This is the kind of life that I want to live. And very practically, if we don't resolve the issues that help lead to a relationship ending, we will bring those into the next relationship. And we have seen that before in our working at the couples workshop, where this is a second marriage for both of them. They didn't really do the work between the marriages, and they ended up creating the first marriage another time, and now they're trying to do it differently. So there is this need to address those issues.
I read statistics a number of years ago, and I probably shouldn't just throw them out like, there are statistics that say this about second marriages when you have not done work on yourself, self-reflection and so forth. But they're astounding. I mean, we know marriage statistics now are at about 50% divorce rate, and no different necessarily for Christians or non, which is interesting. But the statistics I read recently about second marriages where there was not work in between, like you say, and we bring a lot of the same person we were, beliefs we have, and ways we respond to things into the second marriage, 75% failure rate. It's huge. And so at the very least, we encourage people, recovery work, counseling work is worth it if for no other reason than to lead you into healthier relationships, whether it's just current ones with family, friends, colleagues, or if it's in a new relationship of marriage one day. It will make a difference. And I see that too with the people who are staying here after divorce and still working in their group and in individual counseling. When they enter into another relationship, it looks and sounds very different. And in fact, they usually talk through what's going on with some feedback from others that know them well, which I also think is a great thing to do, so that they use the value of all they've poured into this recovery journey in a new way for a new relationship.
I am aware of a situation, and this wasn't professional, this was personal. It was someone in my community, and his first marriage ended, and he was a part of a group. In fact, that's how I knew him. He was getting some level of support. He found himself in a new relationship, and those of us who were in the community, as we heard him talk about it, as we experienced it, we had so much concern. And, in healthy ways, we tried to express that. But the reality was, as he was moving towards this thing that we were concerned about, he began to withdraw from us as his community. And I do think that that's a great red flag to pay attention to. If you're moving towards something, and in order to do it, you feel like you have to move away from your community that has been with you, there's probably something to slow down and pay attention to. And that may be that indication that, yes, I'm in recovery, I'm doing my work, and yet if I'm not really taking the feedback of my safe, wise friends and adults, for either wise women or wise men, that's something that I need to slow down and be aware of.
I would say here, we have several focus points for those that come for our help. The first is about stopping addictive behaviors and also addressing the harm that's been done in the relationship and the hurt that needs to be heard and healed. The second part, though, I think is really for anybody, which is how we grow emotionally and spiritually in our life. And it becomes much less about addiction, and it becomes more about how to take anything in our life, and there will be difficulties in a lot of things and triggers and whatever, and use them to help us learn things about who we are and how to communicate that in a healthy way, to be compassionate, bring empathy in our relationship, care for ourselves well. There's so many things that are important for us to know, just anybody. It doesn't matter whether it's coming from an addictive place or not. There's so many times when I'd love to just take out what we do here and teach it in high schools,
right,
or colleges before people get married, because it's so appropriate to everybody. So
absolutely.
The value is there, I guess,
yes,
is what I'm saying. I don't care where it ends up, but the value is there.
And wherever we are in our journey, there is value to it, and I think part of it is recognizing here at Faithful and True, you are a part of the Faithful and True community. If you are married, if you are separated, if you are divorced, if you are remarried, there is space here for you, because like what you're saying, the things that we're teaching, the things that we believe are universal, and they transcend our marital status.
Yeah, good way.
Beth and I often joke, and it's true, it's a miracle that we made it. That we look, as we celebrate our anniversaries, it's just shocking that we made it, given the chaos that we came out of, the chaos I created. And marriage is difficult. Marriage is complex. And so it's not surprising that not every couple makes it. And so for those that may be listening, and either because they tried recovery and it didn't work and their marriage ended and they feel shame about that, or they grew up in a theological tradition where they were taught that divorce was the worst thing and almost to the point of outside of God's grace. Whatever it is that triggers a person's shame around divorce, if it does, just to speak the truth, that there isn't anything that is beyond God's grace, that relationships are complex, and we don't have to be defined by a failed relationship. Just because my relationship fails doesn't suddenly make me a failure. And if I can learn from that and grow from that, then I can bring whatever healing I've experienced into the next relationship, whether, like you said, it's family or friends, or if it does lead to marriage, and it can become what I wanted and needed from the beginning. But it is going to take my effort, my work, and my commitment to recovery.
Yeah. Well, I think it's good for all of you listeners to know that we don't have an agenda for you when you come here, other than to help you find well-being in your life and to become the person God calls you to be. We love marriages, and there's no doubt that we work hard to help you with that if that is also your desire. And we don't have judgment if it's not. And so we take you as you come and try to help you meet the goals that are yours in life. And we have a lot of good ideas about how to do that because we've been doing this for a long time.
One thing I would say is if you're questioning whether you're a wife or a husband who has gone through divorce, the relationship has ended, and you're asking the question, is recovery still for me? The answer is absolutely yes. Because one of the things that is true is the divorce itself has created a lot of disruption and chaos and pain. I think it's rare, it may happen, but it's rare that when someone gets married, on that wedding day, what they're believing is this is going to lead to divorce. There is this hope, this belief, this possibility that this is going to last the rest of my lifetime, that this is going to be a good and redemptive part of our lives. And so when it doesn't, there's grief and sadness and pain. And one of the best gifts that recovery can give us is the ability to be present in that which is most difficult. And so the temptation is when I'm going through great pain, I go back to my old coping strategies. For the man who historically has used sexual acting out as a coping strategy or an addiction, it's not surprising as he's going through a divorce, he wants to go back to the old coping strategy because he needs his pain reliever, and yet he also believes the consequences aren't great because his marriage is over. So I just want to say that for those of you that are engaged recovery and you're going through a divorce or you are divorced, just to acknowledge that your vulnerability to wanting to go back to the old patterns of acting out are going to be strong. And you're not bad, you're not wrong if it's there. I often say you're never wrong if you desire your drug. It's how do you steward that desire so that you don't give into it, but you become more self-aware because of it.
Yeah. I think I've really appreciated being able to walk alongside a number of women who have had marriages that have fallen apart, or she was, there was a divorce filed from him to her. And I believe that walking alongside her has helped work on all of these elements that we try to work on anyway, about how to walk the high road when life gets difficult and others aren't perhaps being fair, or they're being abusive verbally, or whatever it is that's going on, and for how for them to stand up and be that person that they're proud of and that they love. And there's no better place to work on that really than through a divorce process where things often get very messy. And so I generally encourage women to stay in their counseling process or in their group if they can, and to allow that time to be one where they keep working on who they are and, just looking at themselves, making decisions that are about the person they want to be, as hard as it gets in there, and then to have the support of other women reminding them that it is so hard and helping them from going back to old coping mechanisms of their own.
Absolutely. Not that long ago, Chris and I did a podcast, Elizabeth and I did a podcast on groups. And one of the things that we talked about is in our groups, we have people who are divorced, who are going through divorces. And I think the group is a great place to be. I think for some of the people, when divorce becomes more obvious or evident, they start to question, should I stay in group? And I want people to understand this is exactly where you need to be, that you can continue to be supported and encouraged and affirmed in this place. You can continue to speak encouragement and truth to the rest of the group members. You're not suddenly silent or less of a member if you're divorced. And it truly is the function of the group is to bring all of who we are, whatever it is that we're struggling with, whatever our issues might be in that moment, and bring it to community. And that's always a good practice for us to be in as we're trying to move forward and become the people that God created us to be.
And I would like to remind the listeners, too, that if they're ever in that situation where they're moving through a divorce with support here from men or women, depending, that we are not going to be bashing a spouse. That won't be the role, is to support them in their anger, frustration, or whatever. Our role is to keep helping them look at who they are in response to what's going on. And so it still is about self-reflection and growth for that person. And so, I know there are lots of probably friends or whoever out and about who can do the going along with the anger and, talking about what a horrible thing that was that they did or whatever. But that isn't our role here. Our role is really to help anybody use a very difficult situation to find growth for themselves.
Well, and kind of like what you were saying at the beginning, what we know is if somebody is in blame, they're not moving towards truth. And so to support that or encourage that or validate that actually isn't going to be a part of the redemptive process. So we have space for someone that wants to blame their spouse, but we're going to encourage them to move beyond that to get into the truth of ownership. Whatever is theirs is theirs. They need to own that. That will serve them. And then whatever isn't theirs, they can just release that. And that's the thing we want to support people to do, is to own what is theirs and just surrender and release the parts that are not theirs.
Sounds like the serenity prayer, doesn't it?
It does.
Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change and change the things I can.
So I hope for our listeners, and especially those of you that are a part of Faithful and True, I just want you to hear clearly, we are glad that you are here, that there is a space for you. Whether you come to Faithful and True already as a divorced person, or that becomes your reality while you're here. And what can also be true is in that process, you can have some chaos about Faithful and True. If your hope was coming to Faithful and True is going to save your marriage and it didn't, that can create some chaos in how you perceive Faithful and True. And we want to be with you in that, whatever that complexity may be. And we want to support you.
And we're not miracle workers, are we? In other words, we can only work as hard as you work at it. And so we need two people working very hard. And we have some very good statistics when they do. And it's lovely to watch. And we have our limits about what we can do to help things work out.
Well, we want to thank you for listening and watching us today on the Faithful and True podcast. Debbie, we thank you for joining us again.
Of course.
You are our favorite.
Is that right?
Yes, that's
and you're
right.
still here working too. Your job is still secure.
This just in. I've been re-upped for another week, so this is good. Greg, thank you as always for your leadership here on the Faithful and True podcast. We would like to invite you, if you haven't done so yet, visit our website, faithfulandtrue.com, where you'll find many resources, many free resources that will aid you in your healing journey. We've got over 550 to 600 podcasts such as this one, and we get inundated with just wonderful positive comments about how the podcasts have aided them and benefited them as they go through this journey. So please visit faithfulandtrue.com. You'll find all of the online information and registration options for our 3-day intensive men's workshop, also for the women's workshop. And we have 2 different formats for the couples workshops. So check it out, all at faithfulandtrue.com. In the meantime, we hope that this coming week for you will be a week that's filled with many blessings and with great vision.